Welcome to the Advancement Podcast. Our mission is to reach the lost in America by advancing leaders and churches so that communities are transformed. Join us as we discuss how to stay healthy as leaders, work in teams, and lead change. Come on, let's advance together.
Welcome back to another episode of the Advancement Podcast. Hey, if you enjoy what you're listening to, if you could click the subscribe button, also on whatever podcasting platform you are listening to, if you could rate us, that would help us out a ton. If you're watching, if you could click like on Facebook, subscribe on YouTube, it just helps us spread the message, and it gets the new episodes directly to your inbox right as they come out on Tuesdays and Thursdays. My name is Todd Barr.
And Thursdays and Tuesdays.
And Tuesdays and Thursdays until perpetuity, right? My name's Todd Barham. I'm the host of the Advancement Podcast. Interrupted my good spiel, as always. The lead coach of Advancement, Tim Ware. How you doing, Tim?
I'm doing well. How are you today?
I'm doing good. Well, at the time that this podcast comes out, baseball will be back. And
That's true.
And we were just talking about how you didn't start the timer, but you were also talking about how they have messed up your beloved game.
First of all, remember that we had to go back and say that I don't know that I'm about done. Sports are not a big deal in my world.
I got money that you'll be watching it right now when this comes out.
Well, I might be just because I want to see what they're going to.
Especially if the Astros are doing well.
No, you watching the playoffs in anything in any sports is kind of okay but anyway, the day-to-day stuff. But watching baseball with these COVID rules, the one that got me is that they can't touch bases. You can't touch the base with your hands.
Okay.
Now, as a guy who was a base stealer when I used to play, my senior year of high school, we played 28 games over that season. I had 27 stolen bases.
All right.
So I was a base path guy.
Okay.
And to know that you can't touch the base with your hands.
Yeah.
So that means I can't dive back to a lead after getting a lead off. I can't do an evasive slide and use my hand on the bag.
The games will be quicker.
Well, there won't be anybody stealing bases or doing head first. I mean, you talk about fundamentally changing base running. That does it.
It'll just produce more outs, which makes the games quicker.
Yep.
Which, in my opinion, I think they made baseball better by cutting it to 60 games. Baseball's a long season, man. But I know it's all for revenue, blah, 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 whatever. But
well, I saw that and I thought, anything else you could have done, that changes it. I mean, I've kind of hated. I love, because I was a base guy. I love small ball. I love bunts, hit and runs. I love watching people run the bases rather than jog around the base. I like the days when people were hitting 25 and 30 home runs a year, not 50. Those, when it was a game of. You
like the one that is nothing games, not.
I love the tension of the game and the fact that you were working hard to get there.
Yeah.
And guys weren't swinging for the fence every time, and so I miss that. And this just moves us towards the home run ball, farther away. But anyway,
which sells more baseball. Yeah.
That's because we live in a microwave society that thinks it's all about, they're impatient.
Oh, I feel there's a podcast there. So what we're saying is we're saying it's going to take more discipline for the base runners to.
Well, guys, they weren't letting as many guys run anyway.
Yeah.
Because you didn't want to take people off the base path. When you start playing for the home run, you don't want as many guys running, because then you take them off you're risking taking them off the base paths.
Yeah.
And anyway, that's just a whole nother.
So today we're going to tackle one of the fun issues. Some streams of Christendom love this topic. Some do nothing with this topic.
Yeah.
So it's the topic of church discipline. So touch on that for those of our listeners that are not familiar with church discipline. How would you define church discipline, especially for those millennials and Gen Z out there that
I think it's
we
funny.
grew up with no discipline at all.
So we're working, as you and I are working out, what are we going to talk about? We're working on that. When this one came up, you jumped on it like, you jumped on it like, oh, let's do that. And it's because
it's a hot topic. That's why.
Well,
I mean,
when we first started the podcast, almost 2 years ago now, I went on Facebook, I went on different social media platforms, and I said, what are the things that you guys would like to hear us talk about on a podcast? This was actually from that original list.
Okay.
This is on that original list from 2 years ago.
People want to hear about it.
Yeah, and it's still a topic that people are talking about, and there are some segments of Christendom that lean into this more than others. The more conservative you go in your theology, and I mean like in probably around your salvation theology more than anything else. So we're talking the more reformed your theology is, the more this is a topic of interest, the more it's applied. The farther you get away from that, the less it is, because when in a Armenian theology base where, hey, we've got to go through and I can walk away from the Lord, I can come back, that type of thing.
Yeah.
The grace becomes a lot more important.
Yeah.
And now there's detriment on both sides. When you first start thinking about church discipline, it's a topic that is touchy.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, it's touchy for a lot of reasons. It's number one, we live in a current society that when you use the words discipline, when you use the words accountability, though
they don't like those words.
Don't like those words.
No.
Matter of fact, we live in a society that says you do you and I'll do me, which means the rules that apply to you don't necessarily apply to me. And so I'm not going to hold you. I can't hold you accountable for almost anything, because you get to do you.
Right.
Now, then there are big issues, big social issues. We see that with Black Lives Matter. We see that now. If you're a politician, you're held accountable by one side for something, and you're not held accountable by the other side for the same thing. It's just so messed up. There's when you start we had there's still, when you go to colleges, there are classes on business ethics,
business ethics.
Yeah. There are ethics classes in different realms, but ethics used to be kind of a standardized thing.
Yeah.
And this is ethical, this is not ethical, but even today those things have become clouded. And so that makes the dialogue around church discipline even tougher.
Yeah. Well, I also think it's difficult to have church dialogue in the flighty nature of today's congregants. I mean, most people that I've run into in pastoring would rather change churches than deal with issues. So do you think that in this current, I don't know, there's a word that I'm looking for, but I can't find it, in the flighty nature of people church hopping, going from church to church, is church discipline possible in our current culture? Because it almost seems to me, in any instances that I've had in church discipline, a lot of them have led to them leaving the church and never coming back.
Well, discipline in any realm is always a risk.
Yeah.
Okay. If we just look back historically at idea of church discipline. Um, Church discipline in the 1400s, the 1500s, during the European era of strong Catholicism, church discipline became the Inquisition.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
but this isn't just a Catholic thing, because if you
Right.
move forward to the into the colonial era, here in the United States, the Puritans, and in the Northeast during the colonial era, they had the Sabbath law, and you could be put in jail for working on the Sabbath.
Wow. Okay.
So this was in a society where the church was the dominant force.
Yeah.
Church discipline became an extreme thing. I mean, if we really look, isn't that the same thing that we would say the Pharisees and maybe not all the Pharisees, but those leading priests in the era of the Gospels and Jesus, that they had taken the extremes. They were taking extreme positions on the Mosaic law, and they were making judgments on everyone else based on that. Jesus pushed back on that, when they talked about washing their hand, the washing of hands, and these different things. And those were taking the things of God that he had put in place for accountability, for justice, for these different things, and pushing them to an extreme. So I think part of the difficulty with church discipline in today's world is that when we look back, there were extremes.
Yeah.
And there's fear, because I think one of the struggles we face, why do people not want to deal with it? Why do they leave your church? Because if you said to them, guys, you want to serve, but you're not married.
Yeah. That's a hot one right now.
I mean, I don't mind if you are greeters, but there are limitations to your service, because
spiritual
you're not
leadership.
living in how far you can go in your spiritual leadership as a position here, because you're not living according to the Scripture.
Right.
Having that conversation, people leave churches because they think, well, how dare you hold me to this standard of Scripture?
Right.
And so which leads us to another place. Church discipline. The danger of church discipline is that it can very easily become personal.
Yes.
Or as a leader, become your personal interpretation of Scripture.
Right.
So how Scripture is interpreted, and what are the things what things we choose to hold people accountable for, is also part of the challenge, and the breadth and the difficulty that we have to walk through in this conversation.
Yeah, and that's kind of where I've had the issues with. I mean, I've never really had, issues with discipline from the standpoint of, hey, just normal operating day to day stuff has never been an issue. But when you hold people to a standard when it comes to leadership, whether they have a moral failure, whether they have an issue, it almost seems like, to me, in this culture, and to my disadvantage, I've never walked as a pastor in any other culture than the one we're currently in right now.
Yeah.
And so,
because you're young.
Because I'm a young whippersnapper, and
I'm not as old as everybody thinks I am by the way you treat me. But
I mean, you could be a grandpa, but your kids choose not to.
I have friends that I went to high school that are grandparents multiple times over,
but it's fine.
I are not one.
Yeah. And I'm trying to, okay, I'm just going to go for it, because most of these people probably don't listen to the podcast. most of the time that I've held leaders to a certain standard, all they've done is either go to another church or started their own church away from big bad old pastor who's trying to make them live up to scripture. So how do we do it in such a way that doesn't lead to a great flight from the church? Because I know a pastor listening going, that's all fine and good, Tim, but I don't need 20 people to leave my church over this issue.
Okay. I think with church discipline,
and I'm playing devil's advocate.
I know you are, but it's a real question. I think when we talk about church discipline, let's remember that the scripture says that the Lord loves us we're his children, but he also says that he disciplines his children. Right. If we take that analogy and we push it out a little bit more, when you have four kids, 8-year-old, 7-year-old, 8. He is 8. That's right.
8, 6, almost 3, and 1.
Okay. You have to discipline your children.
Correct.
But do you discipline your 1-year-old at the same way you discipline your 8-year-old?
No.
Why?
Well, level of cognitive understanding is okay. One. I mean, he's the 1-year-old's just barely walking and not even talking yet. So, I can have whole conversations with the 8-year-old to where the 1-year-old, we get 1 or 2 words.
So level of maturity.
Correct.
Which affects their level of their understanding.
Right.
But also because there's also the breadth of the things the 8-year-old can get into.
Yeah.
Is much greater.
Yeah, that's for sure.
But why do you discipline them when they get out of line?
Let's take a moment and hear a word about advancement.
Timware has been a huge benefit and blessing to me personally as well as to my church. When Tim and I first connected in a coaching setting, my church was running in the 130 range. We now run 260, plus we have a really strong online audience. We went through a process of rebranding and changing our name, focusing on our vision, and shifting our culture in a lot of arenas. Tim was invaluable to talk us through that. He came out and met with our team. He was a huge, huge blessing. I highly, highly recommend Advancement.
Now let's get back to the podcast.
Primarily so they don't hurt themselves in the future. I mean, the things that an 8-year-old gets into is probably not going to destroy his whole world every day, but if it begins a pattern that goes further down the road, it could be more detrimental to him later in his life. If he doesn't learn to be respectful of adults, and that's a pattern that continues, then that's something, land him in jail, land him, you get where I'm going.
So first of all, you have to establish a standard.
Right.
Which we would say the standard is scripture.
Correct.
When we're talking about church discipline. But second thing we have is that there are different levels of maturity.
Mm-hmm.
And we have to be cognizant of if someone's a new believer versus a mature believer. And depending on where you are on that scale as to how much you're held accountable for.
Right.
And the way I discipline. I mean, you discipline an 8-year-old differently than you do a 1-year-old. I mean, with a 1-year-old, their memory is pretty short.
Very short, yeah, actually.
Right.
Yeah.
And so when you discipline them, it's, you take it away, you take the toy away for an hour.
Mm-hmm.
But with your 8-year-old, you take the toy or the iPad or whatever away for a week.
Yeah.
So the level of severity increases, the potential severity, because you should know better. There are certain things for the lesson. Also but I think when we think about disciplining with children, why do we do it? What's the real motivator behind why you discipline? Why is it you don't want them to mess up going forward?
I want them to have a good life.
Why?
Because I want them to have the same advantages in life that I had.
Why?
Because that's what God's called them to, ultimately.
Yes, but from a parent's perspective, why do we discipline?
Well, it also makes my life a little easier too.
This guy just all the feelers that are out there are going, you just missed it. He's not a feeler. He's driven.
I'm not a feeler.
We do it because we love our children.
Oh yeah.
I do love my kids.
Yeah.
Oh, I might love my kids.
Yeah.
You know,
I mean, they're an inconvenience at times, but I do love my kids.
I mean, but that's the ultimate motivator.
Right.
Even it's okay, y'all. He's not that dense, really.
I'm a goal person. I don't go back to I love my kid. That's not what
I know. But if Crystal was sitting here, she'd say, "Todd, come on."
Well, that's why I have her to remind me that I have feelings.
So we do this. Discipline should originate from a point of love.
Correct.
And oftentimes in church discipline, it seems to originate from a point of structure or perception. Now but there has to be a love component. As the pastor or leader, or I am disciplined. Any discipline that comes is because of love.
Yeah.
And it's tied to God's love for this person and God's love for the church. It's not strictly a structural thing. It's not just a you're an idiot thing.
Yeah.
Okay.
Even though they are sometimes.
And let's walk that metaphor out a little bit more. What do the experts in child psychology tell us about when we should discipline our children?
Not when we're angry.
Not while we're angry. Good.
When the emotions of the time have gone on, so that the child is not upset themselves, so they can understand why they're being disciplined.
Okay.
I don't read a lot of child psychology books.
Obviously.
So.
But you also don't want to wait too long.
Yeah, for sure.
Because if you
they don't remember.
They do, well, and if you and delay, we used to tell our kids that delayed obedience is disobedience.
Yeah.
But for me to come back and say, last week you did this, and now you're in trouble. Wait a minute. Why wasn't I in trouble for the last 7 days?
Right.
So when we think about church discipline, I think part of this is the one of the great challenges we face is that we let things because we are
we let things go too long.
We let it go too long. We just let it keep going, 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 let it keep going. That's the danger, is that we just keep letting it go. And then by the time we do bring discipline, we've created an opportunity for rebellion because we've let it become entrenched.
Yeah.
That's the thing that they tell you to discipline. Obviously, you got to get over your anger, but that's an internal thing. But you can't let it drag on.
Sure.
As I was looking at different things and Googling and reading and preparing kind of for this, there's a number of places in the Scripture that apply. But I think one of them that we have to look at is Matthew chapter 5.
Okay.
And Matthew 5 is Jesus is talking about, the idea that if someone's done you wrong, that you should, go to them, make it right, leave your gift. This is the leave your gift at the altar passage.
Yeah.
And we're not going to dig into all of that. But I think one of the most important things he says is in verse 25 of Matthew 5, he says, settle matters quickly. I think
don't leave it hanging in there.
Don't leave it hanging. You can't leave it hanging. And, it's easier to just say, oh, it'll just take care of itself.
Not usually.
Things don't always take care of themselves. So I think one of the key things that we have to look at when we're talking about church discipline, whatever your philosophy is probably one of the key things is deal with it quickly.
Okay.
Now that doesn't mean that you don't sometimes need to go check your sources, make sure that what you heard, if somebody says they did so and so did this, if I'm just asking questions to make sure it happened, I'm not gossiping. I'm not going around their back because we want to avoid gossip. We're not going to go talk about it, but we might say, hey, I heard, Todd, that you
got to clarify.
Yeah, I need to clarify. And then when I go into this person, I will, talk to this person, I have to do it because I have to do it out of an act of love.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't want to wait weeks. If there's an issue that needs to be dealt with, then I need to deal with it. And whether it's a staff member or a volunteer or just a regular congregant that's done something that's causing a ripple, then we have to step in, and we need to do it in a timely manner.
Mm-hmm.
And we have to do it with gentleness, and I would always say start with questions. Hey, I heard this happen. Talk to me about that.
Yeah.
Because what's the other thing we know in discipline? There's two sides to every story.
Sure.
If I walk in and say, yeah, to my kid, just started, and I didn't hear what's going on, they may have made a wrong choice, but they may have done it for the right reason.
Right.
So I need to understand so that whatever discipline we exercise is taken, that it is done in a just way, because God is the God of justice.
Mm-hmm.
And it's unjust for me to make an accusation without understanding all the facts.
It's true.
So I think part of what the challenge with church discipline is making sure that we are loving and just at the same time. What is God, Lord, Micah 6:8, what does the Lord require of us? That we act justly, love mercy, and walk humbly with our God. So walking into these moments with humility,
mm-hmm.
not lording it over, not dominating, not trying to drive our agenda, but humility, mercy, and justice. And that's a good stopping place before we dive off, because there's some other cliffs to jump off of in this topic.
There's a lot more I want to go into, but
I'm sure there is. So out of that conversation, I saw you typing in your notes. What's your takeaway?
So, two things: discipline out of love.
Mm-hmm.
I think our gut is sometimes frustration. We sometimes discipline out of frustration, and we let things go on for too long. I've found a lot of times pastors just let things go on because they hope that it'll work itself out. And in this climate, if you can't tell, things don't just have a way of working themselves out. Sometimes you just gotta face it, or it surfaces later worse than it was before.
Yeah.
So, hello.
Yeah. And I think that's exactly right. I would say that I'm good at acting quickly,
mm-hmm.
but sometimes I haven't worked all the way through my frustration.
Yeah.
So, for me, we've talked before, I have to manage my tone, and I don't always manage my tone well,
mm-hmm.
because my frustration bleeds through.
Yeah.
So
I get it.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. Listen to the next one.
Yeah. This will be the beginning of however many we decided to talk about this topic.
Woo! Right. Sounds good. See you next time
on the Advancement Podcast.
If you would like to keep this content coming, all Tim and Todd ask is $1 per show. See how to give, maybe even sponsor an episode or series on the website advancement.cc. Until next week, continue to advance the mission of Jesus.